Okay, Jonathan, back with Elixir Therapy. This is introductory video 2. Not necessary viewing, but some people like this introductory material. I want to talk about what it was like for me the first time I began having a healthy and secure relationship with my inner critic. Specifically for me, what I noticed was a lot of self-criticism, a lot of judgment towards myself and other people. Specifically for me, the thing that really made me feel upset was the level of anger and violence that I would sometimes feel towards myself with things like suicidal ideation or thinking that there's just no point to anything, or a violence towards others, even fantasizing desires to kill other people or hurt other people. And when that would happen, I would feel so unbelievably terrible about myself, and I would try to repress that from ever happening. I wanted to be a nice, kind, enlightened being. And when I would have those experiences, it was like proof that I wasn't that stuff, that I wasn't those things. And so I would try to repress it. I would just think, I just can't do that anymore. I've got to stop. And that wouldn't work. I would find against my will these ideas, emotions, thoughts, criticisms, judgments coming up anyway. And I remember the turning point for me was one day I was going to the bathroom and I started having these violent ideas. Ooh, two chipmunks chasing each other. These violent ideas coming up. And I realized I just can't do this anymore. And then the idea of trying to stop them through willpower or just because it's bad or something wasn't working. And so my first step there was acceptance of my desire, of my criticism, my violence, acceptance of it, and to allow it to go fully into it. Now, this isn't exactly part of this course. I'm just sharing how I kind of started moving towards the IFS framework and having it work for myself. However, acceptance of the inner critic, acceptance that the inner critic is going to communicate in a judgmental and critical way, no matter what, it was really, really important. And that's kind of what I stumbled into in my first experience. So my first idea was, instead of trying to stop these violent ideas or fantasies, what if I just let myself take it all the way through? Let myself actually finish that. And just doing that caused such a wave of release in me. I noticed a lot less of the looping, judgmental, critical phenomenon happening just from doing that. And we'll see that this idea of acceptance in IFS is extraordinarily important and powerful. Cut to maybe 6 months later after that. I'm not exactly sure. And I started learning both at the exact same time about the IFS framework and a Buddhist idea about inner demons, which what I found is they parallel each other pretty darn closely, if not the exact same. And that the idea within the Buddhist terminology is that we have protectors within us. Sometimes they're associated with chakra points, areas in the body, and that because we've ignored them, they turn into demons and they're upset with us because we've been ignoring them. We haven't been listening to them. Because essentially, originally, they're protectors. They're trying to actually help us, and then we're ignoring them. An exact same idea with the inner critic, that the inner critic is a protector. It is unbelievably intelligent. It is watching all of our behavior and everyone else's and noticing all of the errors or mistakes according to it, and then trying to keep us from making those errors, from taking chances, from looking stupid, from failing. And both in the Buddhist framework and in the IFS framework, you're looking at trying to heal that relationship, that we have ignored or disowned or ignored that part of ourselves so much that it has mutated into a unbelievably critical, judgmental force. And what I want to introduce here is that there's a line that we're going to try to identify between being critical and judgmental and being abusive. That someone, a protector, wanting to point out certain dangers and certain possibilities and things that might go wrong makes total sense. When that crosses over into violence or abuse towards ourselves or someone else, that's the line that we need to be aware of. And that is going to be part of the contract that we have with the inner critic, that we will listen to its criticisms and judgments from now on, but we will not allow it to use abusive language towards ourselves or specifically the inner child. And when I decided to have truly, for me, it was the first true sit down, non-timed, non-pressured meeting with my own inner critic. It was a horror. It was a scary and truly horrific experience. Luckily, I had been prepared for what was going to happen and how long it might take, that it might require breaks and coming back. And what I found for myself, and what I've continued to do with most people, is that in the first meeting with the inner critic, depending on our relationship with it, is going to range from being, relatively critical or judgmental to extraordinarily angry, violent, hateful. And that's where mine was. But because, as I mentioned, a lot of the issues, a lot of the things that were bothering me were these ideas of violence and hurting myself or other people. It was just pretty extreme. And what I found in the first meeting is that I had ignored and disowned this part of myself for so long, for maybe almost my whole life, that it had so much to say. It had so many complaints, angers, judgments, criticism that I hadn't listened to enough previously, that it was like, oh, you're ready for a meeting? Well, then you better buckle up, because I have so many negative things to say, and almost an expectation that I wasn't going to be willing to do that because I hadn't in the past. So first meeting, it probably took a couple of hours. One thing that I did that I think is really helpful was taking notes while the inner critic was talking. I think that shows a level of respect to the being or part of us that you're communicating with or talking with. It shows I'm really going to pay attention to this. I'm not going to forget this stuff. I'm writing it down because I'm going to really take what you have to say seriously. And just after that first 2-hour meeting and allowing my inner critic to unload all of its angers and criticisms and judgments towards me and other people, an incredible feeling of calmness. Once the first meeting had ended, there was an assumption from my inner critic that there was no way I was ever going to come back, that I was going to go back to ignoring it. And when I contracted with my inner critic that I was going to come back as much as it wanted, and I think at that time, as I'll come back tomorrow and we'll do this again. We'll keep doing this. I'm not going to give up. The inner critic certainly did not believe that was actually going to happen. But when I showed up the second time, the second meeting, when I fulfilled the contract with the inner critic for just the second time, the level of relief, the level of change in my upsetness, anxiety, judgmentalness, thoughts of violence dropped to the lowest lows I could possibly remember outside of maybe being a really, really young child. And so now that's what I want to pass on here, that we're going to identify the three inner parts. We're going to create a structure for how we're going to listen, hold, think, and respond, possibly take action for all of them. Because interestingly, that's what the inner child wants, to be listened to, held, taken care of, taken action on. It's also what the inner critic wants. And so as we perfect that cycle, we can keep using it no matter which part we're talking to, no matter who out in the world we're talking to. We can use this cycle to help create really secure, blossoming relationships within ourselves and with other people. Then we're going to create a contract with ourselves that we will consistently do this. We will continue to do this into the future. And if my or many of my clients who have gone on this path is any example, you're going to have a huge emotional shift within yourself, and including in that something that you can carry into the future and continue to do. All right, next up is identifying the three parts within ourselves. See you then.